Good morning to all of you. Phenomenology of Hate, Jean-Luc Marion's contribution. I would like to present some few things about that. The actual circumstances urges us to think about the phenomenon of hate, or at least provokes us to undertake a reliable philosophical reflection, either at least to do not underestimate the deep and important meaning of hate to our life. Two texts of reference, according to Jean-Luc Marion, to the phenomenology of hate deserve our highest attention. The erotic phenomenon, of course, translated by Stephen Lewis, and its second chapter concerning every man for himself and his self-hatred, and of course phenomena to charity, prolegomena to charity, translated also by Stephen Lewis, and its first chapter, Evil in Person. In describing the phenomenon of hate, according to Jean-Luc Marion, I will try to be rather his porte-parole than to present here my own conviction. I keep the peculiar phenomenological discourse using the prima persona singularis by presenting in two short stages, incomplete of course, Marion's thought. First, the phenomenon of hate in the erotic reduction. It would be a meditation on the erotic phenomenon, the second chapter. And then, phenomenon of hate in human consciousness. It would be a meditation about the first chapter of Prolegomena to Charity. So, let's dive in. First, phenomenon of hate in the erotic reduction then. Beginning by the question, what's the use? Marion presents the logic of erotic reduction, leading me, the lecturer, the listener, to other questions constituting anatomy of the erotic phenomenon. Does anyone love me? And then, more precisely, does anyone out there love me? Those questions mark my search for certainty, for assurance, which are caused in me by fundamental lack of love. I am only assured of myself beginning from elsewhere. I am not the principle nor at the origin of myself. Separation and contradiction in my deepest search confirms that even if love of self can indeed be proclaimed, but it cannot be performed. To love myself seems to be quietly impossible. A single and compact I cannot become an other than itself in order to give itself an assurance that responds to the question, does anyone out there love me? To love myself, I would have to precede myself and go beyond myself in order to respect the measure of love which has known. Loving requires an exteriority that is not provisional but effective. Loving requires distance and the crossing of distance. Thus, unable to precede myself, to exceed myself, or to cross the distance, I can neither think nor perform the formula I love myself. If then I can't love, can I also to be? Love being and love to continue to be? What for then persisting in being, if it is not loved nor love? Suicide appears here as first possibility, and it will return in a due moment in this meditation. Before I face the erotic phenomenon, I am forced to face firstly the erotic contradiction. Instead of love, I find hate. Hate that claims by some kind of self-punishment that I hate myself because I can't love myself. The simple claim to loving oneself cannot be accomplished without injustice. Self-knowledge, by its bare fate, prohibits self-love, marking a gap between what I am unlovable and what I need to become unhateable. By delivering a verdict, I accept logically, wisely, and justly not only to require that someone loves me from out there, but in addition, no longer to claim to be able to love myself by myself, giving place to a plain evidence. I hating, in hating myself, I do not at first put my life or my death into question, but instead the possibility I put into question the possibility of my ego considering itself as a lover. Safe hatred, then, cannot be absorbed so easily in the indifference of the simple absence of love. It has to pass to the vengeance, so I find other, more powerful motives for hating the other besides hatred toward myself. Transposing unto the other the weight of my hatred for myself, which thus shared, will henceforth become bearable, or at least for a time. The other appears but as the one that I hate, or I prefer to hate rather than myself, or as the one who bears in my stead the crushing weight of my own hatred for myself. I love, hate other. Hated other makes first possible face of the elsewhere, of the does anyone out there loves me, elsewhere of that out there. So that's the face of my certainty, of my so search assurance. Contradictory but not senseless request, asking the one who can only hate me to love me, appear for the first time from elsewhere. Other delivers me from hate for myself, even if just in part, of course. Other is then the perfect idol, just the invisible mirror of myself. I attack myself well before and more radically than I attack others. Does anyone out there love me? What comes from out there hates you. It's an answer. I have only one same assurance and one unique access to an elsewhere of some sort, that the hatred that I bear to other. Nothing else, unfortunately, unites humans better than hate. So the claim to love myself, finally impossible to accomplish, provokes the hatred of myself by myself, and then the hatred of the other, first for me and then by me. I search in hate certainty and its end assurance. Hypothesis of love of every man for himself lead me to hatred of all for all and of every man for himself. Bella omnium contra omnes, of hopes. Aporia remains whole, but it keeps me from going further than the hatred of all for all and of every man for himself. Here we're passing to the second part of my meditation, the phenomenon of hate in human consciousness, evil in person, le mal en personne, de Prolegomène à la charité. Finding myself in the midst of the aporia of assurance by looking for love and gaining only hate, I am obliged now to investigate ordered irremediably logic of hate, or of iniquity or evil, which now are synonymous here, synonymous of mysterium iniquitatis and its impact in human consciousness. Cheated by my own desire to find certainty and assurance, I experience suffering and pain, sometimes even physically. Evil's first effect is suffering. The second demand that the suffering cease at all cost by suppressing the cause of the suffering at any price and at once. Now I am looking no more for certainty nor assurance, but my immediate concern lies not in finding this cause, but in suppressing it. Evil attacks me and calls for only one response, my own attack, intended to suppress it in return. The logic of evil thus puts forth its first necessity by arousing in me, who is suffering, the desire to another evil, to destroy the cause of evil that is destroying me, to return to the evil its heart. Objectively, the cause of evil, of hate, can well precede the evil I undergo. Suffering, however, plunges me into a subjectivity without doors or windows. The only thing that counts is my suffering, increasing subjectivity of suffering by doubts. Does really deliverance comes through the destruction of the cause of evil? Can I avoid hate only by giving birth to evil? So I passively undergo evil, then actively I kindle a counter evil. And if the evil is universal, then the counter evil will have to become universal also. Logic of hate consists in perpetuation of suffering through the demand for another suffering to oppose evil with counter evil. The severity of evil consists precisely in the way in which it imposes its logic on me as though it were the only logic practicable. My first effort at deliverance retains evil as its exclusive horizon. The worst of evil is perhaps not the suffering itself, nor even the innocent suffering, but rather that revenge appears to be its only remedy. The worst thing of evil is that the logic of revenge triumphs even in the apparent re-establishment of justice, in the temporary cessation of suffering, and in the unstable balance of injustices. For hate consists first in its transmission, its contagiousness. The hate of evil consists in perpetuating hate with the intention of suppressing suffering, in rendering others guilty in order to guarantee my own innocence, of course. The paradox of hatred follows. The only way not to perpetuate hate would consist in not attempting to rid myself of it, so as not to risk engulfing someone else in it. Shall I endure evil or transmit it? It's a figure of Christ appears here. Evil can be vanquished then only by breaking its transmission, that is, by blocking it. Logic of evil as a logic of revenge deepens in proportion of my desire for justice, or rather desire for my justice. That's the trap of iniquity, summum ius, summa iniuria. Logic of hate pushes me to constate, better to avenge myself on myself than to cease avenging myself. The triumph of revenge consists in turning against itself. By turning itself against its own agent, against myself, which of course implies destroying me by suicide. Suicide is the terminal, infernal figure of the logic of hate. Revenge does not re-establish the prior state here, but condemns my future to an irremediable impossibility of loving. It does not restore to the present my past plenitude, but wrecks the possibility by insulting my future. Hate loves me, but only after having brought me to the death. The logic of revenge can triumph in me. Consequently, a suicide can last a lifetime as ecstatic pleasure of an inverted cogito. I hate myself, therefore I am. If I am as accused, I am also the all-powerful accuser. But there's a deception hiding. In order to avenge myself, to kill the last culprit, I must also kill the last witness. Suicide first deceit. It removes from the triumph of revenge even the means of tasting it. Suicide does not only suppress, along with life, the reasons to live, but it kills in me, with life, the very reasons even for killing myself. The logic of evil turns against whoever uses it, because it betrays him. The user discovers himself used. The logic of evil is not a means, but it's an end. It's the end. It kills indifferently enemy and friend by killing the host. The logic of evil has destroyed in me the space of alterity, of distance. I find myself alone, a widow of distance, in absolute impossibility of other. Therefore, I was not deceived, I deceived myself. Satan here is understood as the final possibility to each deceived person to become an absolute idiot, a definitive implementation of the logic of hate. Absolute negative of person, the perfect idiot, idios from Greek language, the one who assumes his particularity as a proper good, who don't want to leave himself to inhabit distance. As a perfect reverse of Christ, Satan kills in me after having killed it in himself, the icon of the invisible. Satan kills in order to reinforce his idiocracy, the idiocracy of his solitude. He kills by rendering me as solitary as he is himself. Satan attempts to undo in me of what makes me person, the free will, convincing me of my human and spiritual nullity, highlighting only my past failures. Evil in person, Satan plunges me into a sadness so radical and dense that I despair of ever being able to escape it. That is to say, of ever being able to will escape from it. Satan deluded me into believing that I already have no more will. He is an eternal absence inhabited by this minimum of consciousness, which allows him to hate his inexistence. I can always begin to become like he by following the logic of hate. Will I find a will in myself against such a logic of hate? As we can see across the above statements of Marion's Phenomenology of hate, we can conclude that if we want to make our world a little bit better place to live and to live in home rather than in prison, we are forced, as philosophers, to consecrate our reflection to the phenomenon of hate. I thank you for your attention.